Welcome to the southern edge of Skyrim, where the mist never truly lifts, and the earth seems to breathe beneath your feet. They call this place Falkreath, a city of roots and stone where the living walk among the memories of the dead. Here, graves outnumber houses, and every name carved in the soil becomes a prayer whispered into the fog. The air carries the scent of pine and rain, and something older, something that does not grieve, but remembers. The Nords say this is where kind's breath slows, where souls linger to listen before they cross the veil to Sovngarde, and perhaps they are right. For even the wind seems to move carefully here, unwilling to disturb the sleep of so many. If you stand in the forest at dawn, you can hear it, not silence, but the sound of rest. Tonight, we walk through that stillness, through rain that falls like memory, and shadows that do not frighten, but forgive. This is Falkreath, where endings are not feared, and the earth itself remembers every breath ever taken. Pause, wind fades into soft choral hum. Welcome to the forest of rest and regret. Falkreath, where the dead sleep and the forest remembers. There's a place in Skyrim where the mist never quite lifts, where the scent of pine mingles with turned earth, and where the living walk quietly among an army of the dead. Not the shambling, restless dead of old crypts, but the honored fallen, warriors, farmers, lovers, and children, all resting beneath weathered stone in one of the largest graveyards on the entire continent. This is Falkreath, the city of ghosts, where death is not an ending but a companion, woven into the very identity of the hold that bears its name. When you first approach Falkreath from the southern road, having crossed from the hills of Serenity, you might mistake it for just another modest Nordic settlement. The wooden buildings cluster together beneath towering pines, smoke rises from chimneys, and the sounds of daily life drift on the wind. But then you notice the silence between those sounds, the weight in the air, and the rows upon rows of grave markers stretching into the forest shadows. Here, the boundary between life and death feels thinner somehow, worn smooth by centuries of remembrance. The people of Falkreath don't fear this proximity to death. They've made peace with it, even embraced it in their own way. Walk through the town and you'll find the Dead Man's Drink Tavern, where locals gather to share stories over mead. Purchase your supplies at Grave Concoctions, the alchemy shop where the proprietor Zarya mixes her potions with practiced care. Even Corpselight Farm takes its name from this ever-present theme, though the crops it produces are as vital and living as any in Skyrim. These aren't morbid choices born of some dark obsession. They're acknowledgments, reminders that in Falkreath, death has always been part of the landscape, as natural as the pine trees and as constant as the mist. The graveyard itself sprawls across the northern section of town, an immense field of stones, both ancient and recent. Some markers date back to the Merethic era, their inscriptions worn smooth by time and weather. Others are fresh, the earth still dark where loved ones were recently laid to rest. Walking among these graves, you begin to understand why Falkreath earned its reputation as the hero's graveyard. These aren't just local residents buried here. Warriors from across Skyrim have requested their final rest in this place, wanting to lie alongside the honored dead of countless battles that have scarred this land over millennia. And make no mistake, Falkreath has seen more than its share of bloodshed. The Hold's strategic position at the southern border of Skyrim, where the pine forests give way to the mountain passes leading into Cyrodiil, has made it a crossroads of conflict since time immemorial. Armies have clashed here, raids have swept through these woods, and border disputes have painted the ground red more times than any scholar could count. Each conflict added more names to the cemetery, more stories to be told in hushed voices around winter fires. But Falkreath is more than its graveyard, more than the sum of its sorrows. The Hold encompasses one of Skyrim's most beautiful and haunting landscapes, a vast pine forest that seems to exist in perpetual twilight. where the canopy filters sunlight into soft green shadows and mist clings to the ground like a living thing. Lake Ilinalta, the largest body of fresh water in the province, dominates the western portion of the hold, its dark waters hiding secrets both ancient and recent. To the east, the ruined town of Helgen stands as a stark reminder that destruction can come from the sky itself, delivered by the very dragons that once ruled this world. The forest teems with life, both natural and supernatural. Wolves hunt in packs through the undergrowth. Bears den in hidden caves. Spriggans guard their sacred groves with fierce devotion, their wooden forms blending seamlessly with the trees they protect. Somewhere in these woods, the Dark Brotherhood maintains its last functional sanctuary in all of Tamriel, hidden beneath the earth, where only those who know the ancient passwords may enter. And in the shadows between the trees, travelers speak of seeing ghosts, spirits of warriors who fell in battle, unable or unwilling to leave the land yet they died defending. The people who call Falkreath home are a hardy lot, shaped by their environment and their history. They harvest lumber from the endless forest, fish the cold waters of the lake, and farm what land they can clear. The lumber trade keeps the hold prosperous, with mills constantly turning out timber that's shipped across Skyrim. But there's a certain gravity to the residents here, a quietness that sets them apart from the more boisterous Nords of other holds. Perhaps it's the constant reminder of mortality that surrounds them. Perhaps it's the mist that seems to muffle even laughter. Or perhaps it's simply that living so close to so much history, so much accumulated memory, teaches a kind of humility that's hard to find elsewhere. The hold has known many rulers and many kingdoms. For centuries, Falkreath wasn't even considered part of Skyrim at all, but rather belonged to the Colovian estates of western Cyrodiil. The people here speak with accents that carry traces of imperial influence, and their customs blend Nordic tradition with Colovian sensibilities in ways that can seem strange to those from the northern holds. This cultural mixing has left Falkreath with a unique identity, not quite Nordic, not quite imperial, but something distinctly its own. As we explore the lore of Falkreath, we'll walk the same paths that ancient tribes once traveled, trace the rise and fall of kingdoms, and uncover the secrets that lie buried beneath centuries of accumulated history. We'll meet the people who shaped this land and the forces that scarred it. We'll venture into the deep forest where nature and magic intertwine, and we'll stand in the graveyard where thousands sleep their eternal sleep. We'll learn about the lumber that built cities, the battles that defined borders, and the quiet persistence that has allowed this hold to survive when others might have crumbled. This is Falkreath, a place where every stone tells a story, where the forest whispers with voices from the past, and where the living tend the memories of the dead with careful devotion. It's a land of mist and memory, of ancient trees and older sorrows, of life continuing its stubborn march forward even as death waits patiently in the shadows. Welcome to the hero's graveyard. Welcome to the hold where history lies beneath your feet with every step you take. Ancient roots, the men of Creath and the shadow of Aelia. Long before Falkreath became a hold of Skyrim, before the Nords claimed these forests as their own, the land knew other inhabitants. The story begins in the mists of the First Era, in a time when the proud Aeliad civilization ruled much of Cyrodiil with cruel brilliance, and humans lived as slaves beneath their magical dominion. Among the many human tribes that suffered under Aeliad bondage, historical texts mention a people called the Men of Creath, and it's from this ancient tribal name that Falkreath itself derives its identity. The Men of Creath appear in two significant poetic works from the First Era. The first is the Adabala, attributed to the legendary Mori House, who fought alongside Alesia during the Slave Rebellion. The second is the Song of Pelennor, a collection of verses written by various unknown authors that chronicle the deeds of Pelennor Whitestrake, one of the most fearsome and mysterious figures in Tamrielic history. Both texts mention the men of Creath as a distinct group, separate from the Nords of Atmora, suggesting they may have been Nedic peoples, indigenous to the region that would become southern Skyrim and northern Cyrodiil. According to these ancient accounts, the men of Creath were enslaved by the Ayleids and taken from their forest homes to work in distant holdings. The Adabal Eye specifically mentions them being imported from the north to serve as slaves, which tells us something important. Even in bondage, the Ayleids recognized these people by their origins, by the forests they came from. The name itself carries power. That suffix, Creath, appears in other place names across this region, Kilcreath, Dunkreath, and variations that suggest this wasn't just a tribal designation, but a descriptor of the land itself, possibly meaning something like fortified homestead or forested settlement in an ancient dialect that blended Nedic and Aldmeric influences. The forests around what would become Falkreath were different in those ancient days. Denser, darker, more primal. The Ayleids had established mining operations in the region, extracting precious metals and crystals that fed their magical pursuits. Some scholars speculate that ruins near Lake Ilinalta may be remnants of these ancient Ayleid outposts, though time and nature have reclaimed most such evidence. The men of Creath who remained in the area, those who weren't taken as slaves, likely lived in small tribal communities, hunting the forests and fishing the waters, much as their descendants would do centuries later. Then came Pelennor Whitestrake, and everything changed. Pelennor was a being of terrible power and equally terrible rage. Whether he was man, god, or something else entirely remains a subject of debate among scholars, but what's certain is that he arrived during the Elysian slave rebellion with one purpose: the complete and utter destruction of Ayleid civilization. The Song of Pelennor describes him achieving the liberation and empowerment of the men of Creath after orchestrating what it euphemistically calls a massacre of elves in the northern holdings, the border regions between what we now call Cyrodiil and Skyrim. But liberation through Pelennor came at a cost that echoed through the ages. The texts describe him falling into fits of madness, where whole swaths of lands were devoured in divine rampage to become void. Some scholars interpret Lake Ilinalta itself as evidence of this destruction, a crater left by Pellennor's reality-warping fury, though this remains speculative. What we know for certain is that the Ayleid presence in the region was utterly annihilated. Any elven structures, any monuments to their civilization, were reduced to rubble so thoroughly that little evidence remains today. The men of Creath emerged from this cataclysm changed. They were free, yes, but their ancient homes had been transformed by violence. The landscape itself bore scars that would never fully heal, and yet they endured. They rebuilt their settlements in the forests, this time without the shadow of Ayleid domination hanging over them. They developed their own culture, one that blended their Nedic heritage with influences from the Colovian tribes to the south, and eventually with the Nord traditions that would sweep down from Atmora. The linguistic evidence suggests fascinating complexity in these ancient people. Historical texts mention that the men of Creath spoke a Colovian dialect that contained some Aldmeris words, remnants perhaps of their time in Ayleid bondage, or evidence of even older interactions between human and elven peoples in this region. This multilingual heritage would become a defining characteristic of Falkreath, marking it as a place where cultures met and mixed, where the rigid ethnic boundaries that defined other regions became more fluid and permeable. It's worth noting that the men of Creath were described as being part of the Colovian conglomerate, rather than being classified as Nords, even though they lived in what we now consider Skyrim. This tells us something crucial about how ancient peoples viewed territory and identity. The borders we take for granted, The clear line between Skyrim and Cyrodiil didn't exist in the same way during the First Era. People identified more with their tribal affiliations and local regions than with the grand kingdoms that would later claim their lands. The men of Creath were forest people, defined by their relationship to the pine woods and mountains they called home, not by whether some distant king considered them subjects. When the Nords began their great expansion south from Atmora during the Merithic and early First Eras, they encountered these men of Creath in the forests. The interaction between these groups wasn't always peaceful. The Nords were conquerors after all, sweeping across Tamriel with axe and frost magic. But the men of Creath weren't entirely displaced either. Instead, over generations, there was a blending. The men of Creath adopted Nord customs, worshipped the Nordic gods, and eventually came to identify as Nords themselves, but they never completely lost their distinctiveness. Even today, scholars note that the people of Falkreath carry traces of this ancient heritage in their dialect, their customs, and their relationship to the land. The Colovian connection remained strong throughout much of Falkreath's history. While the northern holds of Skyrim maintained their pure Nordic character, Falkreath remained more cosmopolitan, more influenced by the imperial territories to the south. This made sense given the geography. Falkreath sat at the crossroads of major trade routes, where goods and people flowed between Skyrim and Cyrodiil. The famous Pale Pass, the main mountain crossing between the two provinces, lay just south of Falkreath's territory. Anyone traveling from the imperial heartland to Skyrim's interior had to pass through or near Falkreath, bringing with them their languages, their customs, and their blood. Some accounts suggest that minotaurs once roamed these forests in the ancient days, claiming them as ancestral territory before being driven out by human settlers. Whether these creatures were native to the region or were the result of alien experiments, the elves were known for their grotesque biological manipulation, remains unknown. But stories persist of ancient minotaur sites hidden deep in the woods, places where travelers still feel an unexplained dread and where the trees seem to remember older, darker times. The name Falkreath itself comes not from the men of Creath or the Nords, but from the Falmer, the snow elves who inhabited Skyrim before their enslavement by the Dwemer and their corruption into the blind creatures that lurk in the darkness today. The name derives from the Falmer language, though its exact meaning has been lost to time. This linguistic heritage suggests that the snow elves once had a significant presence in the region, perhaps maintaining settlements or sacred sites among the forests before the coming of men. That the place retained its Falmer name even after being settled by humans speaks to the deep history layered into every aspect of this land. The snow elves left their mark in other ways too. Scattered throughout Falkreath Hold are ancient ruins of unmistakably elven construction, crumbling arches and weathered foundations that predate human settlement by untold centuries. These ruins are far fewer than in other parts of Skyrim, partly because the forest has been remarkably efficient at reclaiming them, and partly because human settlers likely dismantled many such structures to build their own homes. But in the deepest parts of the woods, in places where the trees grow so thick that sunlight never penetrates to the forest floor, you can still find stones carved with spirals and patterns that no human hand created. By the time written records become more reliable in the late First Era and early Second Era, the men of Creath as a distinct people had largely disappeared, absorbed into the broader Nordic population. But their influence persisted in subtle ways. The burial customs of Falkreath, the relationship its people maintained with the forest, the linguistic peculiarities of their dialect, all these carried echoes of those ancient forest tribes. They had become Nords, yes, but Nords with a unique character, shaped by their particular history and the land they called home. This layered history, Nedic, Aliad, Colovian, Nordic, with traces of Falmer and perhaps even other elder races mixed in, created something distinct in Falkreath. It became a place that didn't fit neatly into the categories that defined other holds. It was Nordic, but not entirely. It was influenced by Cyrodiil, but never truly imperial. It maintained its own identity, stubborn and enduring, like the pines that covered its hills. This cultural complexity would shape Falkreath's fate through all the centuries to come, making it a land that kingdoms would fight over precisely because it didn't quite belong to any of them, completely. The ancient men of Creath are gone now, their tribal identity dissolved into the larger currents of history. But the forests remember, the name remembers, and the people who call themselves Nords of Falkreath carry in their blood the legacy of those ancient forest dwellers who survived slavery, liberation, and the death of civilizations to claim these woods as their eternal home. The legend of Bjarfrud. How Falkreath was forged. So, every Nordic city has its founding legend, that semi-mythical moment when some great hero carved civilization from the wilderness. For Whiterun, it was the companions establishing their mead hall. For Windhelm, it was Ysgramor himself laying the first stones. For Falkreath, the founding story centers on a man named Bjarfrud Skjoralmor. And like all the best Nordic legends, it involves monsters, axes, and an absolutely unreasonable amount of tree chopping. The epitaph of Bjarfrud, preserved in stone and repeated in song, tells us he was the warrior who drove out beastly woodland inhabitants and cut down the great forest to build the settlement. This might sound like typical Nordic boasting, another tale of a lone hero doing the work of 100 men. But there's more to this story than simple bravado. The details that have survived give us a window into what Falkreath was like in those ancient days, and what it took to establish a permanent settlement in these haunted woods. Picture the pine forest as it existed in the deep past, before human axes had thinned its ranks. Trees stood so close together that a grown man could barely pass between them. The canopy grew so thick overhead that the forest floor existed in perpetual gloom, even at noon. In these conditions, anything could be lurking just beyond sight. And according to the legends, much was lurking. Creatures that the ancient Nords described as beasts, though what exactly they meant by this remains open to interpretation. Some scholars believe these beasts were literally large predators, bears, wolves, perhaps even mammoths that had wandered into the forest from the northern plains. The pine forest has always been prime hunting territory, and before human settlement, it would have supported populations of apex predators far larger than what exists today. A lone warrior trying to establish a settlement would indeed face a constant battle against such creatures, who would view this upstart human as either a threat to their territory or a convenient meal. But other sources suggest the beasts might have been something else entirely. Remember the minotaurs we mentioned earlier, the creatures who claimed these forests as ancestral territory? Bjarfrud's legend might record the final displacement of these beings from their ancient lands. Minotaurs in the Elder Scrolls universe aren't simple animals, but intelligent, dangerous creatures with their own cultures and grudges. Driving them from the forest would have required not just strength, but cunning and ruthless determination. The violence of this displacement might explain why certain parts of Falkreath's woods still feel unwelcoming to human presence, as if the land itself remembers being taken by force. Then there are the more exotic possibilities. Spriggans have guarded the forests of Falkreath since time immemorial, nature spirits given form and fury. Were these the beasts Bjarfrud drove out? If so, he didn't drive them far. Spriggans still haunt the deepest groves to this day. Perhaps Bjarfrud established an understanding with them, marking certain areas as human territory while leaving other sacred groves untouched. This would explain why parts of the forest feel actively hostile to human intrusion, while others have been settled without supernatural resistance. Whatever the nature of these beasts, Bjarfrud's strategy for dealing with them was characteristically Nordic and devastatingly simple. Cut down the forest itself. Remove the trees. Remove the shadows. Remove the shadows. Remove the hiding places. Remove the hiding places. Remove the predators. It was a solution of brutal practicality that would have horrified any Bosmer or Colovian druid. But it worked. Bjarfrud and his followers took axe to pine, creating clearings where the sun could reach the ground, where crops could grow, and where human buildings could stand without fear of the woods creeping back to reclaim them overnight. The timber from this massive deforestation project didn't go to waste. Bjarfrud used the harvested wood to construct the first permanent structures of what would become Falkreath: halls, homes, walls, everything needed for a functioning settlement. In a sense, Falkreath was built from its own conquest, the forest's body transformed into the tools of human civilization. This relationship between the city and the woods it was carved from would define Falkreath forever. The people here have always been both the forest's children and its conquerors, living in a state of constant negotiation with the wilderness that surrounds them. The feat of clearing enough forest to establish a town earned Bjarfrud something greater than wealth or fame. It earned him a dynasty. He was crowned as the first Jarl of Falkreath, establishing the Skjoralmor clan as rulers of the Hold. This wasn't a title granted by some distant high king, but one claimed through deed and recognized by those who had followed Bjarfrud into the wilderness. He had made the land livable, therefore he had the right to rule it. This was the Nordic way in those ancient days, leadership proven by action, authority earned through accomplishment. What's remarkable is the longevity of the Skjoralmor line. The dynasty Bjarfrud founded would rule Falkreath for centuries, maintaining power well into the interregnum of the Second Era. This continuity is unusual in Nord history, where dynasties tend to rise and fall with violent regularity as ambitious warriors challenge sitting jarls for dominance. The Skjoralmor endurance, Almor, suggests either exceptional competence in governance, or, more likely, that they understood how to balance the competing interests that made Falkreath unique: the Nordic traditionalists who wanted to maintain pure Nord customs, the Colovian-influenced merchants who drove the Hold's economy, and the forest itself, which remained a living presence that could never be entirely tamed. The legends say that Bjarfrud established certain traditions that would define Falkreath for generations. He marked the boundaries of the settlement with standing stones, claiming specific territory as human land while acknowledging that the deeper forest remained wild and free. He established the first cemetery, setting aside land where the dead could be buried with honor, creating the foundation of what would become Skyrim's largest graveyard. And he made peace with the forest spirits through offerings and ritual, recognizing that total conquest was impossible and that coexistence required respect as well as strength. One particular story about Bjarfrud has survived in local folklore, though it doesn't appear in any official histories. It's said that after clearing the forest and building his hall, Bjarfrud spent 3 days alone in the deepest woods, armed with nothing but a hunting knife. When he returned, he was changed, quieter, more thoughtful. He told his people that he had walked far enough into the forest to reach places where human axes had never struck, where the trees grew as they had since the dawn of time. There, he said, he had understood something. The forest would outlast them all. They could carve clearings, build cities, even burn down sections in war, but the forest was patient and inexhaustible. Given time, it would reclaim everything they built. Rather than finding this depressing, Bjarfrud apparently found it liberating. If the forest would always win in the end, then humans needed to make their peace with being temporary residents rather than permanent conquerors. This philosophy, whether Bjarfrud actually expressed it or whether later generations attributed it to him, would influence how Falkreath developed. Unlike other Nordic holds that aggressively pushed back the wilderness, Falkreath learned to live within it, taking what was needed, but not attempting to dominate nature completely. The legacy of Bjarfrud's approach can still be seen in how Falkreath is laid out. The town doesn't have the massive stone walls of Windhelm or Solitude. It doesn't sprawl outward like Whiterun, constantly expanding its territory. Instead, Falkreath has remained relatively compact, confined to clearings that have been maintained, but not significantly expanded for centuries. The forest comes right up to the edge of the settlement in most places, and there is an accepted understanding that humans belong in the clearing, but not in the deep woods. This creates a unique relationship between the town and its environment, not separate from the forest, but embedded within. Falkreath, a human enclave in a fundamentally wild landscape. Bjarfrud died eventually, of course. Legends being what they are, his death is recorded in multiple contradictory ways. Some say he fell in battle against Reachman raiders from the west. Others claim he died peacefully in his hall, surrounded by children and grandchildren. One particularly dark tale suggests he walked into the deep forest one winter night and was never seen again, choosing to return to the wilderness that he had both conquered and learned to respect. Whatever the truth, he was buried in the graveyard he had established, the first of countless warriors who would find their eternal rest in Falkreath's consecrated earth. The Skjoralmur dynasty that Bjarfrud founded would face innumerable challenges over the centuries: invasions, famines, political intrigue, and the shifting allegiances between Skyrim and Cyrodiil. But the line endured, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining the core principles that Bjarfrud had established. They were jarls who understood that ruling Falkreath required more than military might or political cunning. It required an understanding of the land itself, a respect for the death that permeated the Hold's identity, and a willingness to live with the forest rather than attempt to master it completely. By the time the Skjoralmur line finally ended, whether through failure of heirs or violent overthrow, the records become unclear. Falkreath had been shaped irreversibly by Bjarfrud's vision. The city he founded would change hands many times, would see countless wars and rulers, would even shift between kingdoms. But the fundamental character he established, that relationship between civilization and wilderness, between human ambition and nature's patient persistence, would remain constant. In this sense, Bjarfrud's true legacy wasn't the buildings he raised, or even the dynasty he founded. It was teaching the people of Falkreath how to live in a place where the forest is always watching, always waiting, and where the dead outnumber the living by a margin that grows with every passing year. The modern residents of Falkreath may not know all the details of Bjarfrud's story. The specific facts have been lost to time, transformed by repetition until legend and history blur together into something that might be neither fully true nor entirely false. But they've inherited his understanding. When they harvest lumber from the forest, they do so with awareness that they're taking from something larger than themselves. When they bury their dead in the sprawling cemetery, they're continuing a tradition that Bjarfrud began centuries ago. And when they look into the deep woods beyond the cleared edges of town, seeing shadows that might be animals or might be something else entirely, they remember that Falkreath was never fully tamed. It was negotiated, one generation at a time, by people who understood that some battles are never fully won. Kingdoms and crossroads, Falkreath between empires. To understand Falkreath's unique place in Skyrim's history, you need to abandon the idea that borders have always been where they are today. The clean line on maps that separates Skyrim from Cyrodiil, running along the Jarl Mountains with Falkreath safely on the northern side, that's a modern convenience. For most of recorded history, Falkreath has been a disputed territory, a border region that belonged sometimes to the Nords and sometimes to the Imperials, with the local population often unsure from one generation to the next which kingdom they served. This ambiguity begins with geography. Falkreath Hold sits at the southernmost point of Skyrim, pressed against the Jarl Mountains that form the natural boundary between the Nordic lands and the central plains of Cyrodiil. The Pale Pass, the most direct route through these mountains, lies just south of Falkreath proper. This made the hold invaluable strategically. Whoever controlled Falkreath controlled the easiest path between Skyrim's interior and Cyrodiil's northern reaches. Armies marching north had to pass through here. Trade caravans seeking the shortest route between Bruma and Whiterun had to use Falkreath's roads. The hold wasn't just on a border, it was the border, the gateway that determined whether movement between the two provinces would be peaceful commerce or military invasion. This strategic importance meant that Falkreath was constantly contested. Every kingdom that rose to power in either province inevitably turned its attention to this forested crossroads. And the people who lived here, who farmed its land and cut its timber, learned to be pragmatic about loyalty. When Nordic jarls held power, they were good Nords. When Cyrodiilic kings claimed the territory, they were dutiful subjects of the empire. This wasn't cowardice, but survival. When armies sweep back and forth across your homeland every few generations, rigid political identity becomes a luxury you can't afford. The most concrete evidence of Falkreath's shifting allegiances comes from the historical records of the Colovian estates. For centuries, Falkreath was explicitly considered part of Colovia, the western region of Cyrodiil known for its independent cities and martial culture. This wasn't a brief occupation or temporary conquest. Multiple sources describe Falkreath as one of the Colovian kingdoms, as integral to that political entity as Skingrad or Coral. The people here spoke with Colovian accents, practiced Colovian customs, and considered themselves part of that culture even if their ancestors had been Nords. How did this happen? When did a hold that we now think of as fundamentally Nordic become Colovian? The transition likely occurred gradually during the Middle First Era, as the expanding kingdoms of Cyrodiil pushed northward into the borderlands. Nordic power was fractured during this period, with independent kingdoms rising and falling across Skyrim rather than a unified government. Falkreath, being the southernmost settlement and the most exposed to Cyrodiilic influence, probably found it practical to align with the stable, wealthy Colovian kingdoms rather than the constantly squabbling Nordic jarls. This Colovian period left lasting marks on Falkreath's character. The architectural style of some older buildings shows clear imperial influence, with stone foundations and more regular layouts than the typical Nordic longhouse. The local dialect picked up Colovian phrases and pronunciations that it never entirely lost. Perhaps most significantly, the Colovian emphasis on law and administration established traditions of governance that differed from the purely martial meritocracy common in Nordic holds. In Falkreath, a jarl's legitimacy came not just from strength in battle, but from the ability to manage resources, negotiate with neighbors, and maintain order. A more bureaucratic approach that reflected Colovian values. The religious landscape also shifted during this period. While the Nordic gods never disappeared entirely, the imperial divines gained significant followings in Falkreath. The worship of Arkay, the god of death, and the cycle of life became particularly strong, appropriate for a place so defined by its enormous cemetery. The Hall of the Dead in Falkreath, unlike similar buildings in more purely Nordic cities, combines Nord and imperial religious practices in ways that can seem strange to priests from other holds. This religious syncretism is yet another marker of Falkreath's hybrid identity. Then, in the late Second Era, came one of the most significant periods in Falkreath's history, the time when it served as the seat of King Colla Cain. By this point, the Colovian estates had fractured into petty kingdoms and warlords, with no central authority unifying them. Culla Khan, ruling from Falkreath, conceived an ambitious plan. He would reunify the West and then conquer the East, reforging the empire that had crumbled at the end of the First Era. But to do this, he first needed to secure his northern border with the Reach, where Nordic clans and Reachman tribes had been fighting brutal wars for generations. For this task, Cuchulainn turned to his finest general, a man named Hjalti Early Beard. The histories record that Hjalti led a small force of Colovian warriors and Nord berserkers north to Old Hroldan, a strategic fortress that controlled access to the Reach. The siege seemed impossible. The walls were too strong, the defenders too committed. But Hjalti possessed a power that would change everything. The Thu'um, the voice that could shake mountains and shatter stone. When he unleashed his voice against Old Hroldan's walls, they crumbled to dust, and the fortress fell. This wasn't just a military victory. The use of the Thu'um marked Hjalti as something more than a mere general. Only the greatest Nordic heroes had wielded the voice. And here was Hjalti, serving a Colovian king from a city that wasn't even considered part of Skyrim, demonstrating power that rivaled the ancient tongues. The Nords who fought beside him began calling him by a new name, Talos, the Storm Crown. And Cuchulainn, recognizing the political implications, began preparing to declare himself emperor. But Cuchulainn never wore the imperial crown. He was assassinated before the coronation could take place, murdered by unknown hands in suspicious circumstances that have been debated for centuries. Some blamed ambitious courtiers. Others suspected Hjalti himself, removing the one man who stood between him and ultimate power. Whatever the truth, Cuchulainn's death meant that Hjalti, now known as Tiber Septim, became emperor instead, founding the dynasty that would rule Tamriel for centuries. Falkreath's role in this pivotal moment cannot be overstated. This modest hold, this disputed borderland that had spent centuries being passed back and forth between kingdoms, served as the launching point for the Third Empire. Tiber Septim's conquest of Tamriel began here, with that impossible victory at Old Hroldan that demonstrated the Thu'um's terrible power to a world that had forgotten such forces existed. And Cuchulainn, the last king to rule from Falkreath, became a footnote in history, the man who almost unified the West, but instead cleared the path for someone greater. After Tiber Septim consolidated power and established his empire, Falkreath's status became clearer. It was formally recognized as part of Skyrim rather than Cyrodiil, though the transition wasn't immediate or complete. Throughout the Third Era, Falkreath maintained close ties to the south, with trade and communication flowing more naturally to Cyrodiil than to the northern Nordic holds. The local Jarls paid homage to Skyrim's High King, yes, but they also conducted considerable business with Bruma, Coral, and the other northern Cyrodiilic cities. In practice, if not in law, Falkreath remained what it had always been, a liminal space, neither wholly one thing nor the other. This dual identity created advantages and problems in equal measure. On the positive side, Falkreath became prosperous through trade, serving as a waypoint for goods moving between Skyrim's interior and Cyrodiil's markets. Lumber from the pine forest was highly prized in the south, where trees grew less densely and wood was more expensive. Fish from Lake Ilinalta found eager buyers in Bruma. The hold's economy flourished in ways that more isolated Nordic holds couldn't match. But the ambiguity also bred suspicion. Pure-blooded Nords from the north viewed Falkreath with distrust, seeing its Colovian influences as contamination, a dilution of proper Nordic culture. When political tensions rose between Skyrim and the Empire, Falkreath found itself suspected of sympathizing with the South simply because its people spoke with different accents and practiced different customs. This sense of being not quite Nordic enough would haunt the hold through multiple crises, making its residents feel like outsiders in their own province. The Imperial Legion recognized Falkreath's strategic importance and maintained a strong presence there throughout the Third Era. Fort Neugrad, the military installation that defends the hold's eastern approach, was kept well garrisoned and well supplied. The town of Helgen, guarding the southern road from Cyrodiil, was fortified and given special attention. These weren't just defensive measures. They were statements. Falkreath belonged to Skyrim, and the Empire would protect it from any who thought otherwise. But Empire protection comes with Empire control. The local Jarls had less autonomy than their counterparts in holds like East March or the Pale. Imperial administrators advised, or some would say interfered with, local governance. Tax collectors came regularly, taking a larger share than they did from other holds, justifying this by the need to maintain the roads and forts that made Falkreath strategically viable. The people chafed under this oversight, even as they benefited from the stability and commerce it enabled. The ambiguity of identity affected the common people in personal ways. A young Nord growing up in Falkreath might learn to speak with a slight imperial accent, might worship Arkay alongside Talos, might have a Colovian grandmother and a Nord grandfather. Were they Nord or imperial? The answer was both and neither, a hybrid identity that didn't fit the clean categories that dominated elsewhere in Skyrim. This created a particular kind of character, pragmatic, adaptable, less concerned with ethnic purity than with practical survival, but also somewhat rootless, never entirely comfortable claiming either heritage completely. When the Civil War erupted in the Fourth Era, Falkreath's position became even more complicated. The conflict forced everyone to choose sides, Stormcloaks or Imperials, Skyrim for the Nords or continued union with the Empire. For most holds, this choice aligned with long-standing cultural identities. But in Falkreath, with its mixed heritage and its history of shifting allegiances, the decision was genuinely difficult. You could find strong arguments for both sides. The Stormcloaks offered Nordic pride and independence, the chance to be part of a purely Nordic kingdom. The Empire offered stability, trade connections to the south, and the security that came from being part of something larger than Skyrim alone. The hold ultimately aligned with the Empire under Jarl Siggeir, but it's worth noting that his uncle, Dengir of Stune, held different views. This split at the highest levels of local government reflected divisions throughout the population. Families argued politics over dinner. Old friends stopped speaking. The Civil War didn't just divide Skyrim. It forced places like Falkreath to finally answer the question they'd been avoiding for centuries. Who are we really? Even today, in the quiet years after Alduin's defeat and the Civil War's resolution, Falkreath remains distinct. Walk its streets and you'll hear that peculiar accent, see that blend of Nordic and imperial architecture, feel that sense of a place caught between worlds. The people here have learned to live with ambiguity, to accept that they're part of Skyrim without being quite the same as Nords from Windhelm or Winterhold. They've made peace with their hybrid nature, recognizing it as a strength rather than a weakness. After all, adaptability has allowed Falkreath to survive when more rigid cultures might have shattered. The Hold's motto, if it had one, might be something like, "We endure." Not through martial superiority like Windhelm or political cunning like Solitude, but through flexibility, through the willingness to bend rather than break, to accept new rulers and new circumstances without losing the core of what makes Falkreath itself. This has served the Hold well through centuries of conquest and reconquest, through the rise and fall of dynasties and empires, and it will likely serve them well through whatever challenges the future brings. Because if there's one lesson that Falkreath has learned from its long, complicated history, it's this. Borders change, kingdoms rise and fall, but the land endures, and so do the people who learn to live with uncertainty rather than against it. The Pine Forest, a living, breathing world. Step off the main road in Falkreath, and within a dozen paces, the forest swallows you. Not gradually, not with any polite transition between civilization and wilderness, but absolutely and completely. One moment you can see the wooden roofs of the town through the trees. The next, you're surrounded by ancient pines that tower overhead, their trunks thick as houses, their canopy so dense that the light filtering through takes on a greenish quality, as if you're underwater in an ocean of leaves. The air changes too, cooler, damper, filled with the scent of pine needles and moss and rich earth. Sound behaves differently here, absorbed by the soft forest floor and the thick vegetation, creating a pervasive quiet broken only by bird calls, the rustle of small animals, and the ever-present sigh of wind through the high branches. This is the pine forest that defines Falkreath Hold, not a backdrop to human activity, but a presence in its own right, as much a character in the Hold story as any jarl or hero. The forest existed long before humans came, will exist long after they're gone, and in the meantime continues its ancient rhythms with magnificent indifference to the brief concerns of mortals. Yet humans and forest have been intertwined here for so long that neither can be understood without reference to the other. The forest provides for the people of Falkreath, threatens them, shapes them, and ultimately defines them. And the people, in turn, have learned to read the forest's moods, respect its power, and take from it carefully, always aware that they're guests in a realm far older than their cities. The trees themselves are primarily pines of a species adapted to Skyrim's cold climate, tall, straight-trunked conifers with needles that stay green year-round. Some of these giants are hundreds of years old, perhaps thousands. Their root systems intermingle beneath the ground, creating a vast network that makes the forest almost a single organism, each tree connected to its neighbors in ways that scholars are only beginning to understand. When one tree falls, whether from age or storm or human acts, the others around it respond, adjusting their growth patterns to fill the gap. The forest heals itself, slowly but inevitably, maintaining its integrity across centuries. Between the great pines, smaller trees and shrubs create a layered complexity. Birch trees grow in clusters wherever enough light penetrates the canopy. Young pines struggle upward, most doomed to die in shadow, but a lucky few finding gaps where they can reach for the sky. The undergrowth varies by season, thick and green in summer, sparse and hidden beneath snow in winter, but always present, always reclaiming any ground that humans abandon. This isn't a tame garden or a managed forest. This is wilderness that tolerates human intrusion, but never truly submits to it. The flora of the pine forest has practical importance to the residents of Falkreath Hold. Mortality, the distinctive fungus that grows on dead trees, is valuable both as food and as an alchemical ingredient. Mountain flowers, red, blue, purple, and yellow, bloom in clearings and along the edges of the forest, their petals prized by alchemists and healers. Nightshade grows in shaded areas, its dark berries deadly poison, but useful for certain potions if handled correctly. The forest provides thistles for making paper, mushrooms for eating, and herbs for healing. For those who know how to read the land, the forest is a vast resource, offering sustenance to those who treat it with respect. The forest's edge can be found at the shores of Lake Ilinalta, where pines give way to water in abrupt transition. The lake itself is enormous, one of the largest bodies of fresh water in Skyrim, its dark waters reflecting the surrounding trees and sky with mirror-like clarity on calm days. Fish thrive in these cold depths: salmon, slaughterfish, other species, both familiar and strange. Local fishermen know the best spots, knowledge passed down through generations, and the lake provides a reliable food source that has sustained Falkreath through times when other resources failed. But the lake has a reputation darker than its waters. Local folklore claims it's cursed, and there's some historical basis for this belief. An imperial fort once stood on its shores, a substantial military installation that should have endured for centuries. Instead, it collapsed into the lake in a single catastrophic day, sinking beneath the waves and leaving behind the flooded ruins now known as Ilinalta's Deep. The disaster was blamed on experiments conducted by a rogue mage named Malin Varen, who had taken over the ruins to pursue his twisted research with Azura's star. Whether the fort's collapse was natural, magical, or some combination remains unclear, but the result was unmistakable. The lake gained a fearsome reputation, and fishermen began reporting strange sightings and unexplained phenomena. Even without supernatural elements, Lake Ilinalta commands respect. Its waters are cold enough to kill an unprepared swimmer in minutes. Sudden storms can turn its surface from glass-smooth to deadly rough with frightening speed. Slaughterfish lurk in the deeper waters, and while mostly scavengers, they'll attack living prey if hungry enough or if blood enters the water. The lake is beautiful, yes, but also dangerous, teaching the same lesson as the forest itself. Nature here is neither benign nor malevolent, but indifferent, rewarding those who respect its power and punishing those who don't. The White River begins at Lake Ilinalta, flowing east through the Hold and eventually becoming one of Skyrim's major waterways. Following the river through the forest reveals a landscape of stunning beauty. Waterfalls tumbling over ancient rocks, pools where fish gather in the slack water, and banks lined with moss and ferns that create miniature gardens of green. But the river also serves as a boundary of sorts, a natural division in the forest that animals and people alike use to navigate this trackless realm. The wildlife of the pine forest is diverse and often dangerous. Wolves are perhaps the most common predators, hunting in packs of 3 to 6 animals. Their howls echo through the forest at night, a sound that has terrified travelers since humans first entered these woods. The wolves of Falkreath are particularly bold, having learned that the forest's thick cover gives them advantages against larger prey. They'll trail potential targets for miles, waiting for the perfect moment to attack. And their coordination in pack hunts demonstrates an intelligence that makes them formidable opponents even for armed warriors. Bears are less common but far more dangerous. The brown bears of the pine forest are massive creatures, standing as tall as a mounted horseman when they rear up on their hind legs. Most bear encounters happen by accident, a traveler stumbling into a den or surprising a bear at its feeding grounds. And these encounters often end badly for the traveler. The bears aren't naturally aggressive toward humans, but they're territorial and protective of their cubs, and once threatened, they're nearly impossible to escape on foot. The smart move is to avoid them entirely, which requires constant attention to the forest signals: fresh claw marks on tree, scat on the trail, the distinctive smell of a bear den. Saber cats prowl the edges of the forest, particularly in the higher elevations near the Gerald Mountains. These magnificent predators, with their oversized fangs and muscular builds, are apex hunters that fear nothing. A single saber cat can take down prey far larger than itself, and they've been known to attack armored warriors if sufficiently hungry or threatened. The Nords of Falkreath have a peculiar relationship with saber cats. They respect them as worthy opponents, and in some cases have learned to tame and train them as mounts. This practice is rare and dangerous, requiring handlers with exceptional skill and patience. But it speaks to the close relationship between the people here and the predators they live alongside. Then there are the Spriggans, and here we move from natural wildlife into something stranger. Spriggans are nature spirits given physical form, creatures of wood and leaves and magic that guard the forest's sacred places. They appear as feminine figures composed entirely of plant matter, their bodies bristling with branches and flowers, their movements simultaneously graceful and uncanny. Where Spriggans dwell, other forest creatures gather, wolves and bears that would normally hunt each other coexisting peacefully under the Spriggan's influence. Attack a Spriggan and you attack the forest itself, for it will call these creatures to its defense, turning what seemed like a single enemy into a coordinated assault by multiple predators. The Spriggan's intelligence is debatable. They don't speak any language humans recognize, and their actions seem driven by instinct rather than reason. yet they demonstrate clear purpose in defending certain groves and areas while ignoring human activity elsewhere. Some scholars theorize that spriggans are extensions of the forest's will, avatars of the collective consciousness of all the trees and plants in a given area. Others believe they're independent entities that have simply adopted the forest as their territory to protect. Whatever their true nature, they're respected in Falkreath with a reverence bordering on religious awe. Local hunters know which groves the spriggans guard and avoid them, understanding that some parts of the forest are not meant for human intrusion. Moss Mother Cavern, tucked into the hills west of Falkreath proper, exemplifies the spriggans' domain. The cave system hosts an entire ecosystem under spriggan guardianship: underground pools, luminescent fungi, and an atmosphere of primordial calm that feels utterly removed from the human world above. Travelers who've ventured into the cavern and survived describe it as simultaneously beautiful and deeply unsettling, a place where nature's power feels concentrated and intentional. The spriggan that dwells there, larger and more ancient than most of its kind, doesn't attack intruders immediately, but watches them, seeming to assess their intentions before deciding their fate. The forest's relationship with magic goes beyond spriggans. The entire region has an ambient magical quality that experienced mages can sense, a background hum of natural power that makes certain spells more effective, and others less so. Restoration magic, which draws on life force and natural energy, works particularly well in the pine forest. Destruction magic, in contrast, often fizzles or produces unexpected results, as if the forest itself resists forces designed to destroy. Some locations within the forest have stronger magical signatures than others: clearings where the moon seems brighter, groves where time moves differently, streams whose water has alchemical properties beyond those of ordinary water. These magical anomalies have practical implications. Alchemists from across Skyrim come to Falkreath specifically to harvest ingredients grown in magically charged soil. The potions and poisons created from these materials are notably more potent than those made with ingredients from elsewhere. This has made Grave Concoctions, Falkreath's alchemy shop, a destination for anyone serious about the alchemical arts. Zaria, the shop's owner, knows the forest intimately, understands which plants to harvest when, and guards her knowledge jealously. She's not being greedy. The knowledge of which grove produces which effect, which moon phase enhances which properties, represents generations of accumulated wisdom that could be easily misused in ignorant hands. The lumber industry that sustains Falkreath's economy operates within the forest with care born from hard experience. Lumberjacks have learned through painful lessons which areas can be safely harvested and which must be left alone. Clear-cutting an entire grove invites disaster. Landslides, predator attacks, or simply the forest's passive-aggressive response of refusing to regrow, leaving barren ground that erodes into useless wasteland. Sustainable forestry isn't a moral choice here, but a practical necessity. Take only mature trees, leave enough seed bearers for regeneration, rotate harvesting areas to give the forest time to recover. These aren't guidelines, but survival strategies. The sawmill in Falkreath operates constantly during the warmer months, its blades screaming through logs harvested from sustainable cuts deeper in the forest. The lumber produced here is prized across Skyrim for its quality: strong, straight-grained, resistant to rot when properly treated. It's used in construction across the province, and ships carrying Falkreath timber can be found in ports from Solitude to Windhelm. This industry has made the Hold prosperous, but its prosperity built on careful negotiation with the forest rather than simple exploitation. Winter transforms the pine forest utterly. Snow piles deep between the trees, muffling all sound and covering the undergrowth until the forest floor becomes a pristine white expanse, broken only by the dark trunks of the pines. The cold is intense, dropping to temperatures that can kill an unprepared traveler in hours. Yet the forest remains alive beneath the snow. The pines continue their slow metabolism, their evergreen needles still performing photosynthesis whenever. Sunlight manages to penetrate the cloud cover. Animals adapt, bears hibernating in their dens, wolves growing thick winter coats, saber cats descending to lower elevations where prey hasn't been driven away by the cold. Humans must adapt too. Winter travel through the forest becomes extremely dangerous, with trails disappearing beneath snow and landmarks becoming unrecognizable. The people of Falkreath mostly stay close to town during the coldest months, venturing into the forest only when absolutely necessary and always in groups. Winter is when the forest feels most alien, most removed from human concerns, as if it's retreating into itself to endure the cold and emerging in spring, barely aware that humans exist at all. Spring's return brings the forest roaring back to life. Snowmelt swells every stream into a rushing torrent. Plants that lay dormant through winter emerge with explosive vigor, covering the forest floor in green within weeks. Animals bear their young, filling the woods with the sounds of wolf pups, bear cubs, and countless other creatures beginning their lives. The forest feels young again in spring, energetic and optimistic in ways that contrast sharply with its ancient patience at other times of year. The pine forest of Falkreath is, in the end, a world unto itself, complex, dangerous, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to human desires. The people who live here have learned this lesson well. They take what they need, but no more. They show respect through action, maintaining traditions of forest management that have sustained both humans and wilderness for centuries. They tell their children stories about the forest, not to frighten them, but to teach them awareness, to train them in the constant vigilance that living on the edge of wilderness requires. This relationship, neither dominance nor submission, but careful coexistence, defines Falkreath as much as its graveyard or its Colovian heritage. The forest made the Hold what it is, shaped its economy and culture, and continues to exert influence over every aspect of life here. Those who understand this flourish. Those who don't, who try to conquer or ignore the forest, learn quickly that the pines were here first and will be here last, patient as stone and just as enduring. Lake Ilinalta, beauty, mystery, and the curse of Fort Ilinalta. When travelers first catch sight of Lake Ilinalta from the hills above, they often stop, arrested by the sheer scale of what lies before them. The lake stretches from horizon to horizon, its dark waters rippling under the wind, surrounded by pine-covered shores that give way to the mountains in the distance. On clear days, the sky reflects perfectly in its surface, creating the disorienting impression of looking into infinite depth. At sunset, the water turns to molten gold and copper, colors so vivid they seem unreal. It's a view that has inspired poets and painters, a natural wonder that should be celebrated across Tamriel. But ask the local fishermen about Lake Ilinalta and watch their expressions change. Listen to the stories mothers tell their children when warning them away from the shore. Pay attention to the prayers that boat crews murmur before venturing onto the water. The lake's beauty hides something darker, something that has earned it a reputation as one of Skyrim's most cursed places. This isn't superstition or local color invented to frighten tourists. Something happened at Lake Ilinalta, something that left scars the water can't wash away. The lake itself is ancient beyond reckoning, carved by glaciers in the deep past and filled by snowmelt from the surrounding mountains. It's fed by numerous streams and springs, and it serves as the source of the White River, which flows east across Skyrim, eventually joining the Yorgrim River near Riften before continuing south into Cyrodiil. This makes the lake hydrologically significant. What happens here affects water quality and availability across a vast region. But its importance goes beyond mere hydrology. Lake Ilinalta is, quite simply, enormous. Only Lake Honrish in the Rift rivals it for size among Skyrim's inland waters, and Ilinalta might actually be larger depending on which cartographer you ask. The lake is deep as well as broad, with sections where the bottom drops away into blackness so complete that local divers refuse to explore it. Fish thrive in these depths, salmon running up from the White River, slaughterfish lurking in the darker waters, and other species, including some that appear nowhere else in Skyrim. For a community like Falkreath, dependent on multiple food sources for survival, the lake's bounty is essential. Without it, the hold would struggle to feed its population. The fishing industry on Lake Ilinalta operates year-round, though the most productive seasons are spring and early summer when fish migrate to spawn. Fishermen use nets, lines, and traps, their techniques passed down through families for generations. They know the lake's moods intimately, when storms are building, when the fish are running, which sections are safe, and which are mysteriously barren despite seeming ideal. This knowledge is survival. Lake Ilinalta might provide generously, but it can also kill without warning. Sudden storms appear from nowhere, capsizing boats and drowning their crews. Cold water robs strength from swimmers in minutes. And then there are the less natural dangers, things glimpsed in the deep water, movements too large and deliberate to be fish. The curse rumors center on Fort Ilinalta, or rather, what remains of it. The fort was a substantial imperial military installation, built sometime in the early Fourth Era when the Med Empire was consolidating control over Skyrim. Its location was carefully chosen, on the lake's northern shore, with clear sight lines in multiple directions and access to water for supplies. The fort should have stood for centuries, anchoring imperial authority in Falkreath Hold and serving as a base for patrols and military operations throughout the region. Instead, in a disaster that eyewitnesses described as surreal and horrifying, the entire structure collapsed into the lake in the span of a single day, sinking beneath the waves and taking its garrison with it. The official imperial records, such as they are, blame the collapse on structural failure, perhaps undermining from underground water seepage or faulty construction that couldn't handle the building's weight. These explanations satisfy bureaucrats in distant capitals but ring hollow to anyone who saw the aftermath. The fort didn't crumble or list slowly to one side, as buildings do when their foundations fail. According to survivors, it seemed to implode, pulled down by some force from below, as if the earth opened to swallow it whole. The few soldiers who escaped described a feeling of wrongness in the moments before the collapse, a vibration in their bones, a pressure in their ears, the sensation of reality becoming unstable around them. The truth, pieced together from journals and witness accounts, points to Malin Varen. He was a teacher at the College of Winterhold, brilliant but unstable, obsessed with immortality and the manipulation of souls. When his experiments grew too disturbing for even the college's lax standards, he was dismissed and told to leave Skyrim entirely. Instead, Varen gathered his most devoted followers and relocated to the abandoned fort on Lake Ilinalta's shore. There, away from prying eyes, he could pursue his research without interference. Varen's specific goal was to achieve immortality by trapping his soul inside Azura's star, the legendary Daedric artifact that functions as a reusable soul gem. This required modification of the artifact, reverse engineering its divine construction, and experimentation that consumed dozens of souls to perfect. The magical energies involved in this work were immense, pouring into the fort's foundations, destabilizing reality in localized areas. The fort's collapse wasn't structural failure, but reality failure. The physical laws that kept stone solid and the ground stable simply stopped functioning in the area where Varen worked, and everything came crashing down. Varen apparently survived the initial collapse, at least in a sense. His body died, but his soul successfully transferred into the modified Azura's star, achieving his twisted goal. The fort's ruins, now underwater and known as Ilinalta's Deep, became his domain. He established control over a cult of necromancers who occupied the submerged halls, using them to defend his refuge and conduct experiments, even in death. The place became a nightmare of drowned chambers, zombie guardians, and the psychic pressure of Varen's trapped soul radiating corruption through the water. The cursed reputation that Lake Ilinalta gained following the fort's collapse isn't baseless superstition. The disaster poisoned the lake's image in ways that factual explanations couldn't restore. Local fishermen reported strange phenomena in the years that followed. Fish kills with no apparent cause, water that tasted wrong despite being chemically pure, and those persistent sightings of movement in the deep. Some of these reports may have been necromantic activity from Varen's cult. Others might have been natural phenomena misinterpreted through the lens of fear. But the effect was undeniable. People became afraid of the lake. This fear had practical consequences. Property values plummeted along the lakeshore. Fishermen demanded higher pay to venture onto the water, claiming hazard compensation. Tourism, which had begun to develop as people from Cyrodiil discovered the lake's beauty, essentially vanished overnight. Young people began leaving Falkreath for other holds, not wanting to raise families near a cursed lake. The economic and social damage from the fort's collapse far exceeded the immediate loss of life and property. The Jarl, under pressure to address the crisis, eventually sanctioned an expedition to Ilinalta's Deep. The exact outcome of this expedition varies depending on who tells the story, but most accounts agree that someone, likely the last Dragonborn during their wanderings across Skyrim, ventured into the flooded ruins, destroyed Varen's necromancer cult, and retrieved Azura's star. Whether they purified the artifact or corrupted it further depends on choices made in the heat of desperate combat. But either way, Varen's soul was defeated and his direct influence ended. Yet the lake's reputation didn't recover. Curses aren't so easily lifted, especially ones rooted in genuine disaster and maintained by years of accumulated fear. Today, decades after the fort's collapse, Lake Ilinalta remains a place of beauty that people approach with caution. Fishermen still work its waters, economic necessity overcomes fear, but they do so with prayer and ritual designed to appease whatever forces might lurk below. No one builds homes close to the shore anymore. Children are taught to be wary of the water, and on foggy mornings when visibility drops to nothing and the lake's surface becomes a featureless gray expanse, even the most skeptical residents feel the weight of the place's history. The physical remains of Fort Ilinalta are still down there, of course. Intact sections of tower poke above the waterline, especially during dry years when the lake level drops. These ruins attract a certain type of adventurer, treasure hunters, aspiring heroes, scholars of the macabre, all seeking to explore what remains and perhaps recover artifacts from the disaster. Most return empty-handed and disturbed by the experience. Some don't return at all, their disappearances adding new chapters to the lake's dark legend. But Lake Ilinalta is more than just Fort Ilinalta and its curse. The lake remains vital to Falkreath Hold despite its reputation, providing water, food, and natural beauty that enriches life throughout. The region. The Lady's Stone stands on an island near the lake's center, one of the ancient standing stones that grant blessings to those who discover them. Pilgrims still make the journey to this stone, swimming or boating out to the island to receive its gift, suggesting that not everything about the lake is cursed, or perhaps that blessing and curse can coexist in the same location. Half Moon Mill operates on the lake's southwestern shore, its water wheel driven by a stream that feeds into the lake. The mill provides valuable lumber processing for Falkreath's timber industry, and despite its location in what should be a cursed, abandoned area, it functions normally. Its operators, Hurt and Hearn, seem unconcerned by the lake's reputation, though local rumors whisper darker explanations for their indifference to supernatural fears. The lake's ecosystem continues regardless of human concerns or supernatural disasters. Waterfowl nest along its shores. Fish spawn in its shallows. The cycle of seasons brings ice in winter and warmth in summer, and life adapts to both extremes. The lake existed for millennia before Fort Ilinalta was built and will exist for millennia more. Human fears and tragedies, however significant they seem to those experiencing them, barely register in the lake's deep time. This perspective, that nature operates on scales that dwarf human concerns, brings a certain comfort to those willing to embrace it. There's a philosophical dimension to Lake Ilinalta that residents of Falkreath understand perhaps better than outsiders. The lake embodies a truth about their hold. Beauty and danger intertwine here, cannot be separated, and must both be accepted as aspects of a single reality. You cannot have the lake's bounty without accepting its risks. You cannot appreciate its beauty while denying its darkness. The lake teaches the same lesson as the forest, as the graveyard, as everything else in Falkreath. This is a place where death and life coexist, where the past remains present, and where pretending otherwise is both impossible and foolish. So the people of Falkreath continue their relationship with Lake Ilinalta, complicated and cautious and ultimately necessary. They fish its waters, draw sustenance from its bounty, and acknowledge its power with respect that borders on reverence. They tell stories about the fort's collapse to remind themselves and their children that even the mightiest works of man are temporary, subject to forces beyond human control or comprehension. And they live with the knowledge that sometimes beauty is dangerous, sometimes danger is beautiful, and sometimes the most important lesson a place can teach is simply that the world is larger and stranger than our understanding of it will ever be. The graveyard, where heroes sleep, stand at the northern edge of Falkreath on an overcast morning when the mist lies thick among the gravestones and the first light filters weakly through the pine canopy, and you'll understand why this place is called the Heroes' Graveyard. The cemetery sprawls before you, acre after acre of stone markers disappearing into the forest shadows, each one representing a life lived and ended, a story that concluded here in the soft earth of Falkreath Hold. Some stones stand straight and proud, their inscriptions still legible after centuries. Others lean at drunken angles, their words worn smooth by weather and time. And still more lie toppled and half-buried, forgotten by everyone except the land itself. This isn't the largest cemetery in Tamriel by absolute count. The imperial city's necropolis holds more individual graves, and Sentinel's crypts could swallow Falkreath's graveyard whole. But for Skyrim, for the Nordic tradition of burial customs, there is no more significant place than this. This is where warriors who died in battles across the province asked to be interred, wanting to rest alongside other honored dead rather than in their home holds. This is where families have maintained plots for generations, ensuring that when death came, whether in glorious battle or quiet old age, they would return to Falkreath for their final rest. The cemetery's origins trace back to Bjarfrud Skjoralmor himself, who set aside land for burials when he first established the settlement. This wasn't just practical necessity. After all, every community needs somewhere to put their dead. It was a statement of values, a declaration that honoring the deceased was as important as housing the living. Bjarfrud apparently understood something profound, that a people's relationship with their dead reveals their relationship with their own mortality, their sense of continuity with past and future, their willingness to remember even when remembering brings pain. That original cemetery was small, of course, just a cleared section near the settlement where the first generation of Falkreath's residents found their rest. But battles came to the region with grim regularity. Skirmishes with Reachmen from the west, raids from bandits hiding in the forest, conflicts between rival Nordic kingdoms, and later the larger wars between Skyrim and Cyrodiil as borders shifted. Each conflict brought casualties that needed burial, and Falkreath's reputation for proper, respectful interment spread. Warriors began requesting beforehand that if they fell, they wanted burial here, among others who had known battle's cost. The cemetery grew organically, expanding into the forest as each generation added their own dead to those who came before. This created a rough chronological layering where the oldest graves lie closest to the center of town and newer ones push progressively outward into the woods. Walking from the Hall of the Dead toward the cemetery's perimeter is like traveling through time, seeing how burial customs changed, how the names on stones shifted from pure Nordic to mixed Nordic and Imperial, how even the style of stonework evolved from crude carved marker to more elaborate monuments. Some sections are reserved for specific groups. There is an area where the Stormcloak soldiers who fell in the Civil War lie, their graves marked with simple stones but tended with care by those who shared their cause. Another section holds Imperial legionnaires from the same conflict, separated in death by the same divisions that separated them in life, though their graves receive equal maintenance from Falkreath's priests. Families with long histories in the hold maintain their own plots, generational groupings where you can trace a clan story through the names and dates on sequential stones. The stones themselves vary enormously in size and elaboration. Wealthy families commission tall monuments with detailed carvings, family crests, scenes from the deceased's life, lengthy inscriptions praising their virtues and achievements. Commoners get simpler markers, perhaps just a name and 2 dates, but placed with no less care. Warriors' graves often feature weapons carved in relief, axes and swords for those who died in battle, tools of trade for those who fell in peacetime. Children's graves break your heart with their smallness. Tiny stones bearing names of those who never got to grow old, never got to understand why their parents and the gods would let them die so young. Kust, the current groundskeeper, maintains the cemetery with dedicated reverence. He's a young Nord, earnest and hardworking, who treats his position not just as employment, but as sacred trust. Every day, weather permitting, you'll find him tending graves, straightening stones that have tilted, clearing weeds from paths, ensuring that no grave is neglected regardless of how old or whose family might have forgotten it. He knows the cemetery intimately, can tell you who's buried where, going back generations, can recite the stories behind graves that catch visitors' attention. Runeal serves as Falkreath's priest of Arkay, the god of death and the natural cycle of life's ending. He's an older Altmer, which is unusual for a Nord community. Elves serving Nordic gods typically raises eyebrows, but Falkreath's mixed heritage makes such things more acceptable here than elsewhere. Runeal conducts funeral rites, consecrates new graves, and maintains the Hall of the Dead, a small structure that serves as both temple and his personal residence. He's a contemplative man, given to philosophy about death's role in giving meaning to life, and his non-Nordic perspective brings a different dimension to the Hold's death-focused culture. The Hall of the Dead itself is modest compared to similar structures in larger cities. It's essentially a single-room temple with a shrine to Arkay dominating one wall and simple living quarters for Runeal and Kust. Unlike the halls of the dead in places like Whiterun or Windhelm, which include extensive catacombs for storing bodies, Falkreath's version is just a processing station. Bodies are prepared here, then taken directly to the cemetery for burial in the earth. This reflects an important philosophical difference. In Falkreath, the dead belong in the ground, returned to the soil that gave them sustenance in life, not locked in stone vaults underground. The preparation of bodies follows ancient Nord customs mixed with imperial influences. Bodies are washed, dressed in burial clothes, and blessed by Runeal before interment. Family members participate if possible, saying their goodbyes and ensuring their loved one looks presentable for their journey to whatever lies beyond. There's no embalming. The cold climate preserves bodies naturally during winter, and summer burials happen quickly enough to avoid problems with decay. The approach emphasizes natural return to the earth rather than preservation or resistance to decomposition's inevitable process. Funeral services in Falkreath are community affairs even for those without extensive families. The whole town typically attends, paying respects to the deceased regardless of personal relationships. This isn't just polite custom, but existential insurance. When your turn comes, you want the community there to acknowledge your passing, to witness that you lived and that your life mattered. The services combine Nordic and imperial elements, prayers to both Arche and the Nordic gods, creating a syncretic ritual that feels distinctly Falkreath, even while honoring both cultural traditions. The cemetery attracts visitors from across Skyrim, some coming to pay respects to specific graves, others seeking the contemplative atmosphere the place provides. There's a particular quality to being surrounded by so much accumulated death, not frightening exactly, but sobering, forcing awareness of mortality in ways that modern life typically allows people to avoid. Young warriors sometimes camp in the graveyard overnight, a ritual of facing death to prepare themselves for battle. Elderly residents visit regularly, seemingly comfortable among the stones, perhaps acknowledging that they'll join these ranks soon enough. Ghost stories are inevitable in a place like this. The cemetery has earned a reputation for paranormal activity, with numerous witnesses reporting apparitions, strange sounds, and the sensation of being watched when walking alone among the graves at night. Skeptics dismiss these as imagination or natural phenomena misinterpreted, but the frequency and consistency of reports suggests something genuine. Perhaps the sheer concentration of death in one place creates thin spots between the living world and whatever lies beyond. Perhaps some spirits linger, unwilling or unable to move on to Sovngarde or Aetherius. Or perhaps the cemetery's reputation creates a feedback loop where expectation produces experience, produces more expectation. One particular ghost story has persisted for generations, concerning a spectral warrior who appears on foggy nights, walking slowly among the graves as if searching for something. The descriptions vary, but most accounts agree he wears ancient armor, carries an axe, and seems more sad than threatening. Local speculation identifies him as one of several legendary warriors buried here. Maybe a hero from the Alessian Rebellion, maybe a Nord king from the early First Era, maybe just a soldier who died far from home and can't remember where he's supposed to be. Runiel, when asked, simply says that some stories are true, some false, and some true in ways that have nothing to do with facts. The cemetery faces ongoing maintenance challenges. Falkreath's climate, with its heavy moisture and freeze-thaw cycles, is brutal on stone. Markers crack, topple, and eventually crumble back into the soil unless constantly repaired. Vegetation grows aggressively, threatening to engulf graves if not regularly cleared. And the forest itself seems to creep inward, as if trying to reclaim land taken from it, requiring constant vigilance to maintain the boundary between consecrated cemetery and wild woodland. Funding for this maintenance comes from multiple sources. The Hold's coffers provide basic support, recognizing the cemetery's importance to Falkreath's identity. Families with means pay for tending specific graves. Visitors sometimes leave coins at particularly famous monuments, donations that accumulate into significant sums. And occasionally, wealthy families from other holds contribute to maintain the graves of ancestors buried here generations ago, ensuring their family's history isn't forgotten even if they no longer live in Falkreath themselves. Some graves have become minor pilgrimage sites. One marker, bearing a name worn too smooth to read, but reportedly belonging to a hero from the War of the First Council, attracts visitors who leave weapons as offerings, asking the dead warrior's spirit to bless their own arms. Another grave, supposedly holding a legendary werewolf hunter, has an iron chain draped across it, renewed periodically when the old one rusts away, with visitors touching it for protection against lycanthropy. Whether these graves actually hold who tradition claims they do hardly matters. The belief creates its own reality, and the rituals around these sites provide comfort and continuity regardless of historical accuracy. The cemetery's cultural impact extends beyond Falkreath itself. The phrase, "earning a grave in Falkreath," has entered Skyrim's linguistic landscape as a metaphor for dying well, for achieving the kind of honorable death that deserves remembrance. Young warriors aspiring to greatness speak of wanting to be buried here someday, acknowledging that ambition includes accepting death's inevitability. The cemetery has become symbolic, representing the Nord ideal of facing mortality with courage rather than denial, of death as the endpoint of life's story that gives meaning to everything that came before. This cultural weight shapes how Falkreath's residents view themselves and are viewed by others. Living in the hero's graveyard means dwelling constantly in death's presence, developing a relationship with mortality that people from other holds find unsettling or even morbid. But the people here don't see it that way. To them, the cemetery isn't morbid, it's honest. Death comes for everyone, warrior and farmer alike, young and old. Pretending otherwise is delusion. Better to acknowledge the truth and live accordingly, with awareness that today might be your last, and that how you conduct yourself matters because it will be remembered. This philosophy manifests in the death-themed businesses throughout town. Dead Man's Drink, Grave Concoctions, Corpse Light Farm. Outsiders often mistake these names for gallows humor, but they're actually expressions of integration. Death isn't separate from life in Falkreath. It's woven throughout the culture, present in names and customs and daily awareness. The people here have made peace with mortality in ways that allow them to live fully rather than in fear of the ending everyone faces. As twilight settles over the cemetery and Kust finishes his daily rounds, the place takes on an almost peaceful quality. The mist thickens, softening the edges of the gravestones until they seem to fade into each other, a field of memory rather than individual markers. Birds settle in the tree at the cemetery's edge, their evening songs mixing with the whisper of wind through pine needles. And for a moment, standing among all these accumulated dead, you feel the continuity of history, the long chain of lives that stretches back into the Merethic era and forward into an unknowable future. The people buried here came from different times, held different beliefs, fought different battles, but they all ended in the same earth, returned to the same soil, united in death's great democracy where titles and achievements mean nothing, and everyone eventually becomes just a name on weathering stone. Falkreath's graveyard is, ultimately, a mirror. It shows us what we'd rather not see but can't avoid, that everyone dies, that memory fades, that eventually even the grandest monuments crumble back into earth. But it also shows us something else, that there's honor in remembrance, meaning in continuing traditions, value in maintaining connections to those who came before. The cemetery endures because people choose to make it endure, to tend the graves and preserve the stories and ensure that the dead aren't forgotten, even as new generations add their own dead to the count. It's an act of defiance against time's erosion, a declaration that some things matter enough to fight for even when the fight is ultimately unwinnable. And perhaps that's the truest legacy of Falkreath's heroes' graveyard, not the famous individuals buried there, but the living community that chooses, day after day, to remember them. Helgen, the town that marked an age. There are cities in history that gain significance, not through what they achieved, but through what happened to them, places that became symbols through catastrophe rather than triumph. Helgen was such a place, a modest fortified town on Falkreath Hold's eastern border with the rift, important but not grand, serving as a waypoint on the road from Cyrodiil to Skyrim's interior. For centuries, Helgen existed in comfortable obscurity, its garrison maintaining order, its people pursuing their trades, and travelers passing through on their way to somewhere else. Then came the 17th of last seed, 4E201, and Helgen's name became inseparable from the beginning of Skyrim's dragon crisis. Understanding Helgen's tragic significance requires understanding its geographic position. The town sat where the road from Pale Pass, the main crossing through the Geralt Mountains from Cyrodiil, entered Skyrim proper before branching toward either Whiterun to the northwest or the Rift to the east. Anyone traveling from Cyrodiil to Skyrim's interior had to pass through or near Helgen, making it naturally important for commerce and border security. The town itself nestled in a valley surrounded by forested hills, protected by wooden walls and dominated by Helgen Keep, a substantial fortified structure that could house a garrison and serve as a last refuge if the walls were breached. The settlement was older than most people realized, with origins possibly stretching back to the early First Era. Some sources mention a place called Hammersjött in the ancient Nordic tongue, which might have been Helgen's original name. The location was ideal for defense. The valley provided natural barriers, the surrounding heights offered observation points, and the forest gave resources for construction and fuel. Early Nordic settlers likely established a fort here to control the southern approaches to Skyrim, and over centuries, a town grew up around that military foundation. By the time of the Fourth Era, Helgen had developed into a proper town, not large but prosperous. It had a tavern where travelers could rest, workshops for various trades, homes for several hundred residents, and the ever-present military presence that dominated border settlements. The Imperial Legion maintained significant forces at Helgen, recognizing its strategic value for controlling movement between Skyrim and Cyrodiil. The garrison was well-equipped and well-trained, representing Imperial investment in holding this crucial position. The town's economy mixed military spending with civilian commerce. Innkeepers, blacksmiths, cooks, and merchants all prospered from serving both the garrison and passing travelers. Farmers in the surrounding countryside brought their produce to sell in Helgen's market. Hunters from the forest traded pelts and meat. It was a typical border town in many ways, a little rough, very pragmatic, populated by people who understood that prosperity and danger often lived side by side in places where kingdoms met. But Helgen's military importance made it more than just another town. It represented imperial authority in a region where that authority was increasingly contested. When tensions between the Empire and Skyrim's Nordic traditionalists exploded into open civil war in the Fourth Era, Helgen became a symbol of imperial control over Falkreath Hold. The town's garrison sided with the Empire, making it a target for Stormcloak sympathizers and a rallying point for those loyal to the Mede dynasty. In the complex politics of Skyrim's civil war, holding Helgen meant controlling the southern border, which meant controlling who and what could move between the province's interior and the imperial territories to the south. On the 17th of last seed in the 201st year of the Fourth Era, this strategic importance led to Helgen becoming the stage for a carefully planned execution. Ulfric Stormcloak, Jarl of Windhelm and leader of the rebellion against imperial rule, had been captured in an ambush near Darkwater Crossing. This was a tremendous coup for the Empire. Removing Ulfric would decapitate the rebellion and likely cause it to collapse into infighting among his lieutenants. General Tullius, commanding the Imperial Legion in Skyrim, decided to execute Ulfric immediately, rather than transporting him to Solitude for a proper trial. The reasoning was sound. Moving a high-value prisoner across hostile territory invited rescue attempts, while a swift execution presented the rebellion with a fait accompli they couldn't reverse. So they brought Ulfric to Helgen, along with several of his soldiers who'd been captured with him, some common criminals being transported to execution sites, and one person who would later be revealed as the last Dragonborn, caught up in the ambush through sheer bad luck. The plan was simple: conduct the executions in Helgen's courtyard, display Ulfric's body publicly as proof of his death, and use this psychological blow to break the rebellion's morale. Imperial soldiers prepared the execution block, checked their prisoner manifest, and began calling names for beheading. What happened next changed everything. Alduin the World Eater, firstborn of Akatosh and the prophesied destroyer of the current Kalpa, returned to Nirn. He appeared in the skies above Helgen without warning, an immense black dragon whose very presence bent reality around him. The ancient Nords had worshipped Alduin as a god, and now that God had returned, displaced in time from the ancient past through circumstances that would only become clear later. But Alduin didn't come to Helgen seeking worship. He came with fire and fury, attacking the town with primal rage that suggested purpose, even if that purpose was inscrutable. The destruction was absolute. Alduin's breath, meteor-like projectiles of pure fire, smashed buildings and ignited everything flammable. The wooden walls that had protected the town for generations disintegrated under the dragon's assault. Soldiers and civilians alike fled in panic, the carefully organized execution dissolving into chaos as survival became the only priority. In the confusion, Ulfric Stormcloak escaped, guarded by his men who seized the opportunity provided by the attack. The Dragonborn, moments from execution, fled into Helgen Keep, accompanied by either Ralof, a Stormcloak soldier, or Hadvar, an Imperial Legionnaire, depending on choices made in those desperate moments. The keep provided temporary refuge but not safety. Alduin's assault continued, collapsing sections of the structure and forcing the survivors to flee deeper into the fort's interior. They escaped through ancient caves beneath the keep, emerging in the wilderness beyond the town, and from there scattered in different directions. Behind them, Helgen burned. Every building was either destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The majority of the civilian population perished, either killed directly by dragonfire or crushed in collapsing structures. The garrison was decimated. By sunset, Helgen was a ruin, and Alduin had vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared. The immediate political consequences were significant. Ulfric Stormcloak's escape meant the civil war would continue, arguably intensifying as both sides processed the implications of a dragon attacking an imperial stronghold. General Tullius lost face from allowing such a high-value prisoner to slip away. The psychological impact on imperial forces was severe. Soldiers who'd been confident of victory suddenly had to contemplate fighting a rebellion while dragons returned to terrorize Skyrim. For the Stormcloaks, Ulfric's survival was treated as proof of divine favor, the gods themselves intervening to save him from imperial injustice. The propaganda value was immense. But beyond the immediate military and political fallout, Helgen's destruction marked the beginning of a new age, the Dragon Crisis. Alduin wasn't the last dragon to appear. Others followed, awakened from ancient burial mounds across Skyrim, and suddenly the entire province faced a threat not seen since the Merethic era. The destruction of Helgen was the opening act of a crisis that would eventually force even the Civil War's bitter enemies to negotiate a temporary truce to address the dragon threat. The ruins of Helgen remained abandoned for weeks after the attack. Imperial forces were too busy dealing with the spreading dragon crisis and continuing war to spare resources for rebuilding. Survivors scattered to other towns, some to Falkreath itself, others to Riverwood, or as far as Whiterun. The dead lay where they'd fallen, burned beyond recognition. Eventually, bandits moved into the ruins, finding the destroyed town perfect for their purposes. Defensible, abandoned, with enough structures still standing to provide shelter. These bandits proved difficult to dislodge. The ruins provided excellent defensive positions, and the criminals could threaten the road between Cyrodiil and Skyrim's interior, extorting travelers and raiding nearby settlements. Multiple attempts to clear them out failed until, eventually, someone, likely the last Dragonborn again, eliminated the bandit presence entirely. But even then, Helgen remained a ruin. No attempt was made to rebuild or resettle. The town had served its purpose in history and then been consumed by it, left as a memorial to the Daydragons returned. Walking through Helgen's ruins years after the attack provokes powerful emotions. The wooden structures are gone, reduced to charred fragments. Stone foundations remain, outlining where buildings once stood. Personal items lie scattered, a child's toy, a merchant's ledger, tools abandoned when their owners fled. The keep still stands, though damaged, its stone construction having survived Alduin's assault better than the wooden town. Inside, you can follow the path the Dragonborn took during their escape, seeing the torture chamber, the collapsed sections, the caves beneath where the final escape route opened. But what strikes you most is the silence. Helgen was a living town, full of voices and activity and all the noise of human habitation. Now it's quiet except for wind and the occasional animal. The silence speaks to loss in ways that words can't capture. Not just the people who died, but the community that ended, the continuity that was broken. Helgen had existed for centuries, or possibly millennia. Generations of families had called it home, raising children who raised their own children in an unbroken chain reaching back into the deep past. Alduin severed that chain in a single afternoon. There's a child named Humming who survived Helgen's destruction, sheltered by his father until the man was killed and the boy fled. Haming represents the survivors, those who saw their world destroyed but somehow endured. He doesn't speak much about what he saw, and that silence is perhaps more eloquent than any description could be. What does a child understand about dragons and destiny and the forces that shatter towns? Probably more than adults give them credit for, but articulating that understanding is different from possessing it. Haming lived, and now he has to build a life in a world where dragons are real, and the safe place he'd known his entire childhood exists only as ruins. The philosophical implications of Helgen's destruction extend beyond the immediate tragedy. The town represented stability, order, the assumption that civilization could persist if properly defended. Alduin shattered that assumption, demonstrating that some forces operate on scales where human preparations are meaningless. You could have the strongest walls, the best garrison, the most strategic position, and still be annihilated by powers that didn't care about any of it. This is a hard lesson, the kind that breaks some people and transforms others. For Falkreath Hold, Helgen's destruction was both tragedy and warning. The Hold lost a significant settlement, suffered major casualties, and saw its eastern border become effectively undefended. But it also served notice that the old certainties that borders could be maintained, that threats could be predicted, that proper preparation ensured safety, no longer applied. A new age had begun, one where dragons flew and the rules everyone had accepted were suddenly negotiable. Some believe Helgen will be rebuilt eventually. The location remains strategic, and economic pressures will eventually outweigh the psychological resistance to returning. But it won't be the same town, just as Skyrim isn't the same province after the Dragon Crisis. The new Helgen, if it comes, will be built by people who know what happened to the old one, who understand that destruction can come from the sky on wings of fire and scale. That knowledge will shape every decision, every building, every aspect of the new community. Helgen's legacy is the lesson it teaches, that safety is illusion, that certainty is temporary, and that the world is stranger and more dangerous than comfortable assumptions allow. As you leave the ruins, heading west toward Falkreath or north toward Riverwood, you carry that lesson with you. The skeletal remains of buildings fade behind you, but the memory persists. Helgen was real. The people who died there were real. The terror they experienced in their final moments was real. And the fact that it could happen to them means it could happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. This isn't pessimism, but realism, the acknowledgement that human control over events is more limited than we like to believe. And perhaps that acknowledgement, uncomfortable as it is, represents a kind of wisdom, the humility to understand our place in a world larger and more mysterious than we can fully comprehend. The Dark Brotherhood, last light of the Night Mother. Deep beneath the pine forest, accessible only through a door that speaks riddles and demands passwords, lies one of the most infamous organizations in Tamrielic history. The Dark Brotherhood has operated for millennia, an assassination guild that combines religious devotion with criminal enterprise, serving the Daedric Prince Sithis through contracts that end lives across the continent. By the Fourth Era, the Brotherhood had fallen from the heights it once knew, its sanctuaries across Tamriel destroyed or abandoned, its members hunted by authorities and betrayed from within. But in Falkreath Hold, hidden just off the western road from town, the last active sanctuary endured, barely. The Brotherhood's choice of Falkreath for one of its final refuges wasn't random. The Hold's character aligned perfectly with the organization's needs. This was a place defined by death, where the living existed in constant proximity to the honored dead, where the cemetery dominated the landscape and death-themed businesses dotted the town. In such an environment, the Brotherhood's presence generated less alarm than it might elsewhere. A few more deaths in a hold already soaked in mortality? Barely noteworthy. Bodies needing disposal in a community with the largest graveyard in Skyrim? Convenient. The Brotherhood could operate with relative freedom here, conducting its dark work while the people of Falkreath maintained their pragmatic distance, neither embracing nor aggressively opposing the assassins in their midst. The sanctuary itself is a marvel of paranoid engineering, utilizing both natural cave systems and ancient Nord construction. The entrance appears as a simple black door with a skull carving, easily mistaken for just another strange ruin in a forest full of them. But approach the door and it speaks, asking, "What is the music of life?" Answer incorrectly and you're turned away with a simple rejection. Answer correctly. Silence, my brother. And the door opens, granting access to one of the most secure locations in Skyrim. Inside, the sanctuary combines the functionality needed for the Brotherhood's operations with the reverence appropriate to a religious order. Because that's what the Dark Brotherhood truly is, not merely assassins for hire, but devotees of Sithis, the Dread Father, the primordial void that preceded creation. They don't just kill for money, they perform sacred acts, sending souls to Sithis as offerings to the void. This theological dimension distinguishes the Brotherhood from common murderers and gives their work a ritualistic quality that transcends simple criminality. The sanctuary's main chamber features a word wall where a shout of the ancient Nord language waits to be learned, specifically the dragon shout marked for death. The presence of this wall suggests the sanctuary occupies a site that predates the Brotherhood's tenure, probably an ancient Nord barrow or temple that was repurposed by later occupants. The Brotherhood has always been opportunistic about real estate, preferring to claim abandoned structures with defensible features rather than building from scratch. Why excavate new tunnels when the ancient Nords already created perfectly serviceable underground complexes? By 4E201, when the last Dragonborn stumbled into the Brotherhood's affairs, the Falkreath Sanctuary housed fewer than a dozen members, a pitiful remnant of an organization that once maintained major sanctuaries in every province. The decline had been long and brutal. One by one, sanctuaries fell to raids by authorities, betrayal by traitors, or simple attrition, as members died and weren't replaced. The Brotherhood in Wayrest was destroyed by corsairs. The Cheydinhal Sanctuary, once the headquarters of the entire organization, was wiped out under circumstances still murky. The Corinth Sanctuary and elsewhere went dark with no survivors to explain what happened. The Falkreath Sanctuary endured partly through luck, partly through the skill of its leader, a woman named Astrid. She had rejected the traditional hierarchical structure that had defined the Brotherhood for millennia: the Night Mother, the Listener, the Black Hand's 5 leaders. Instead, Astrid ran the sanctuary as an independent cell, taking contracts directly rather than waiting for the Night Mother to assign them. This pragmatic approach kept the sanctuary functional and profitable, but it also represented a fundamental break from Brotherhood tradition, something that would eventually have consequences. The members of the Falkreath Sanctuary were diverse in origin, but united in their dedication to killing. There was Nazir, a Red Guard who served as quartermaster and handled contract logistics. Gabriella, a Dunmer with a gift for poisons and a pleasant demeanor that contrasted sharply with her profession. Festus Krex, an elderly mage who specialized in magic-based assassinations. Vizara, an Argonian whose reptilian nature gave him advantages in certain contracts. And Babette, who appeared to be a child but was actually a centuries-old vampire, using her innocent appearance to devastating effect. Each member had a story, a path that led them to the Brotherhood. Some were recruited young, trained from childhood in the arts of death. Others came to the organization later, fleeing other circumstances or seeking purpose in something larger than themselves. The common thread was skill at killing and a willingness to embrace Sithis and the Brotherhood's philosophy. This wasn't work for those troubled by conscience or bothered by taking life. Brotherhood members had to possess a certain coldness, an ability to separate the act of murder from any emotional response to it. The sanctuary's operations followed established patterns. Contracts came through various channels: wealthy individuals seeking revenge, spurned lovers wanting rivals eliminated, merchants removing competition, nobles playing politics through murder. The Brotherhood didn't question the morality of contracts or investigate whether targets deserved death. If someone performed the Black Sacrament, the ritual that summons the Brotherhood, they received a response. Payment was negotiated, terms established, and then an assassin was dispatched to fulfill the contract with efficiency and finality. This efficiency had made the Brotherhood legendary. An accepted contract was essentially a death sentence, the target's fate sealed regardless of precautions or guards. The Brotherhood had centuries of institutional knowledge about how to bypass security, how to make deaths look natural, how to disappear afterward without trace. This reputation meant that even the threat of Brotherhood attention could be useful. Nobles behaved themselves knowing that antagonizing the wrong person might result in a Black Sacrament. Merchants negotiated fairly aware that ruthlessness could summon consequences. The Brotherhood's existence, paradoxically, probably prevented more murders than it committed, as people avoided actions that might make them targets. But the Brotherhood in Falkreath was dying. Astrid's rejection of the Night Mother and traditional structure had created stability, but removed the organization's spiritual center without the Night Mother's guidance, or at least the belief in that guidance. The Brotherhood was just criminals who killed for money, distinguished from common murderers only by their skill. The sense of religious purpose, the feeling of participating in something cosmic, had faded. Members went through the motions, but increasingly felt like they were play acting at a tradition they didn't fully understand or believe. Then came the Night Mother herself, or rather, her corpse. Cicero, the last remaining keeper of the Night Mother, arrived at the sanctuary with a wagon carrying a coffin. Inside lay the ancient mummified body of the Night Mother, unchanged despite centuries of death, still whispering to those who could hear her. Cicero begged for sanctuary, claiming the Night Mother had directed him here, that this was where the Brotherhood's future would be decided. Astrid, deeply suspicious and threatened by what the Night Mother's presence implied about her own authority, reluctantly allowed Cicero to stay while she figured out what to do. The Night Mother's arrival proved catalytic. She began speaking to the last Dragonborn, identifying them as her listener, the one who would hear her whis.